time, but we do encourage you to post pics and hashtag Millennium Stage, hashtag Kennedy Center, and hashtag Library of Congress. Every day, the Millennium Stage celebrates the human spirit by presenting a free performance at 6 p.m. 365 days a year, and that's actually 366 days this year. All of our performances are broadcast live and available for on-demand viewing at kennedy-center.org, as well as on our Facebook page and on our YouTube channel to make the arts as accessible as possible. Tonight's performance is part of a special brand new series called Library X Reach LGBTQ+ Changemakers, and it's taking place every Monday in February, presented in partnership with the Library of Congress. We are so excited and proud to partner with the Library of Congress to educate and elevate LGBTQ+ voices at the nation's Performing Arts Center. And now, please welcome me and join me in welcoming Roswell Encina, the Chief Communications Officer from the Library of Congress.
Thank you, Lita, and we appreciate everybody being here today. It's such an honor that the Library of Congress is partnering with the Kennedy Center on this wonderful series. Raise of hands if you've been to the Library of Congress. That's what we want to see. But did you know that the Library of Congress is the largest library in the world? We have the collection of Leonard Bernstein. Recently, we even acquired the AIDS Memorial Quilt Collection. This is more than 200,000 items connected to the AIDS Memorial Quilt. So it includes letters to photographs to even the sewing machine that was made to sew the quilt. So I'm hoping that you can check out what we have. I also want to thank my colleague Meg Metcalf, who organized this series with the Kennedy Center. Please stand, Meg. She's been doing an amazing job. She's our LGBTQ archivist and curator at the library, so she knows all about it. Join us next week for our final, I won't say final, at least for now, event of this series. I'll be speaking next week with Jacob Tobin and Casey McQuiston. They are the best-selling authors of Sissy and Red, White, and Royal Blue, so I hope you can come back next Monday for that conversation. So without further ado, I know you're not here to listen to us. Please welcome our panel.
Thanks so much, Roswell. Good evening, everyone. My name is Nick Brown. I'm your moderator for the program tonight. I've come to this stage by way of two intersecting worlds. The first is my role at Library of Congress. I used to be a colleague of both Roswell's and Meg's. Was a music specialist there for several years and came to the library through my work as a musician. I was in the Army Band program, active as a conductor and horn player and singer and musicologist, and the list kind of goes on. As you'll hear from all of us, we have many, many different hats, and we love all of the different flavors of work that we get to do. I'm currently the Chief Operating Officer for Communications and Outreach at the Prince George's County Memorial Library System. It's a great system that serves over 900,000 residents of Prince George's County. We have 19 branches, a really great team, and some wonderful LGBTQ+ programming coming up this year. So check out pgcmls.info for more info about that. So the title of our panel tonight is Art Times or Art by Activism, Queering the Visual. And once you hear about the background of all the folks up here, you'll notice that visual identity and queer visual identity are not specific to any one art form or medium of expression. You might kind of automatically think, oh, well, this will be about visual art. And it's not just about visual art. Visual art is a component of this all, but this is about how queer identity is expressed or how it is masked to kind of be digested by some who might not be ready for it in a full form. But we'll hear some great perspectives from a variety of different great colleagues here in the DMV area. And this is a great testament to how vibrant the creative scene is here in Washington, D.C. and the greater DMV region. New York and L.A. and Chicago, they like to say things about D.C., but I think this is proof positive that D.C. has a lot going on, especially right now. And if you haven't heard, Go-Go is the new official music of the District of Columbia. The bill is being signed this week. Very exciting. Total tangent, but it's all good. So before we go through and introduce all of the panelists, I'd love to just share a quote from Jeb Byron, who is an artist who's actually from Washington, D.C., a photographer and filmmaker. And the quote goes like this: "Without a visual identity, we have no community, no support networks, no movement. Making ourselves visible is a political act. Making ourselves visible is a continued process." And with that, I'd like to invite Otessa to introduce herself, and then we'll just go down the line. And a bit about yourself, the work that you do, and what brought you to this stage tonight.
I chose the wrong seat because now I have to go first.
You can trade, it's totally open.
So I would say that I am a digital storyteller, which means that, let's see. So I started one of the very first web series that ever existed, which everyone thought was going to be a really bad idea to do. Like, why would you want to create this thing and then put it online? That's really tacky. But they were wrong. Digital streaming, as we've all seen, has become a thing. So that was an interesting kind of wild ride to see the genesis of that and to be a part of that and then to see where we're going, but also the importance of when things become successful, not pulling the ladder up behind you. And I think that's something that is crucial. I'm also a professor, so I profess, and I also started the DC Web Fest 8 years ago, in particular, as being a director and being a writer, realizing that it wasn't just about wanting to do my own work in a way that it was actually going to be greenlit, because literally no one was going to greenlight my work, but also making sure that there were opportunities for other creators. So whether that's podcasting or web series or virtual reality or literally any digital storytelling, that's what we're celebrating and making sure that people can go out and create again. And I probably forgot some stuff. I don't know. I just try to get out of trouble and manage my anxiety.
My name is Jason Barnes. I am a performance artist. I go by the stage name Pussy Noir. Everyone calls me Pussy, even like it's basically my government name at this point. But I was always a performer. I grew up in DC. I was in the Washington Opera Young Singers program. I went to Ellington. Like, this has always been a lifestyle for me. I also worked in fashion and lived abroad and did the most glamorous things that any young person should ever do at way too early of an age, and it was fabulous. I'm still doing it because I'm wearing this. But all of that culminated into me becoming a performance artist, which involves actually doing performance art in nightclubs or in museums or galleries or any kind of space that has a floor and some sound system, to planning major events and curating spaces for many different kinds of people. Some of my dearest friends that I work with are even here tonight, so they know about that. And yeah, it is a fun life, and here's to a lot of glamour.
I love you. We sisters.
Sisters.
I am Lady Dane Figueroa Aditi. I am a Black, Cuban, Indigenous, Nigerian, American performance artist. I'm an author. I have 13 books published. I'm the first trans woman of color in DC to publish a work of fiction as of 2013 with my book Yemaya's Daughters. I am a playwright. Theater Alliance did my play Clytemnestra last year, which was awesome. And Rep Stage is going to be doing my play Ghostwriter next year. I am a 2-time Helen Hayes nominated choreographer. What else do I do? I'm an advocate. I'm co-editing the Black Trans Prayer book with another artist, Jay Mace III. I'm an actress as well. I was Petra on a web series, King Esther, and I was also a story consultant. And I do a bunch of other things. So you just have to look up my website and read all the rest of the things that I do. But and I'm here, so yeah.
My name is Jessie Meadows. I am a writer and a digital creator, which is a fancy way of saying that I make memes. I have a background in art. I went to art school, and while I was in art school, I realized that it was really classist and elitist, and I didn't want any part in that. So I worked as a journalist and a photographer for a while, and then I started making memes kind of in a time of mental health crisis. I was diagnosed bipolar, and also at the same time realized that I needed to come out as queer in order to start a healing process. So I put all of that into memes, and I found this really beautiful creative community through that. I found this form of art therapy, and so now I just advocate about that online and try to help other people also make memes as therapy.
Hi, I'm Josh Vogelsong. I perform as Donna Slash. I guess I started as a DJ for a really long time, but really just wanted to put on wigs and makeup and dance around. So eventually I started doing that. For a while I was in a band called Homo Superior. We were a queer punk, angry, snotty band. I don't know, I always wanted to be in a band, and then eventually when I turned 30, it was like I have to do it now or it's never gonna happen. So unfortunately right now the band is on hiatus, but you know, we'll be back, whatever. I also, for the last year and a half, have been partnered with Sun Cinema, and I curate every Monday night. I do the queer programming for them. And then I host all kinds of events all over town and have a great time.
Awesome, thank you all. So the plan for the evening is we're just gonna have a really open conversation. It's not gonna be a back and forth like that the whole time. And then we'll have Q&A towards the end, so please start thinking about your questions. So to start off, for anyone who'd like to jump in, how do we individually or as a collective group here define queer visual identity right now in our lives, and how has that changed in our own time working in the creative space?
That's a really big question.
I know, I'm sorry. We gotta start big and then go small.
That's a lot of thinking. I think it's something that comes in different mediums as of right now. I mean, like, we have two people here who are literally doing digital media right now. So, you know, both of you I know are seeing it in different forms in terms of digital media. But the queer visual identity is happening, I think, on a major way in terms of music, in terms of fashion, for sure, something that everyone can indulge in and is indulging in, and in terms of, I would say, even social rhetoric, which I think is which is really profound, that not even just a panel like this, but you know, the queer visual identity, aesthetic, the form is being discussed on a regular basis, even in like nightclubs. So,
Great. Anyone else? Agreement or contrast?
No, yeah, I totally agree, right? And I think that also when I think about, you know, identity and I think about visual identity, I think about also the fact that in all of my bios, right, it says that I'm a Black trans woman. You know, I could say I'm a playwright, I'm a this, I'm a that, without having to identify that I am trans, but I think that it's super, super important for me to do that. One, that's the language that we've been given in a colonized world, right? Like, if I were in Nigeria and this was before 1442, I'd be called something different within that indigenous tongue of the Yoruba people. But I don't think it's only in like the ways in which we show up to be consumed, but I think that it is also how we choose to show up.
So we've arrived at this moment where there is significantly more visibility than there has been at other times in the past, though there has always been a continuum of what we now call queer identity reflected in art going back to ancient times and ancient civilizations. Specific to, like, say, the last 100 to 150 years in the United States and Western culture, what are your thoughts on the way that queer visual identity kind of rose up as not necessarily a protest, but something that was going against the grain of mainstream society? And what kinds of discrimination did folks face in becoming publicly and outwardly identifiably queer with their work?
For 150 years?
Wherever you want to go in that 150 years, whatever the big points are for your own thought process around it.
and just looking at history, if you think of 150 years, to begin at that 150 years, we're at the tail end of like Reconstruction. On a basic level, all the men are dead, and all the women are in completely new gender roles with having to take care of homes or businesses. And so just thinking about that, the need for a new sense of identity is there. And that happens a lot throughout history, where you do have a major war or some kind of major happening that puts people in different positions, that displaces people out of their, their gender roles or their socioeconomic roles. And so you have to find a new place for that. So thinking about that, I mean, even thinking about the early 1900s and the 1920s, like being queer was actually more public than people think it was. I mean, the film industry alone was unregulated, so there was a lot of queer filmmakers doing, you know, unhinged work where they were showing sexuality, you know, that we're seeing now in terms of media, and we're seeing that kind of sexuality now, but it was expressed even more back then. So, you know, I think the need for a sense of expression, I think the need for a sense of space in which you can be safe, and then also recognizing when that space can be made is like a major point.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thoughts on that? So to kind of continue along with that thread a bit, what are the roles of institution or institutionalized entities, whether that's the media or the government or museum or library, in kind of becoming the validator of when something can become mainstream, and how problematic or not problematic is that?
I think that, like, when we think about mainstream, right, it's like, what does that mean? Because even though, you know, Sally from the Midwest may not necessarily know why why a certain artist that she might like or actress that she likes wears a certain thing, those of us who are a part of the LGBTQ plus community knows why she likes that certain thing. It's because, like, an LGBTQ plus person made it, probably, right? And so I think that for me, it is that we've always been here, right? We've always been part of the mainstream. It's just about, are the people who are actually coming into the community I would say consuming, but that isn't the word that I want to use. Coming into the community and then using, right? For example, Madonna, right? She came into ball culture. She put voguing in her videos, but there were people who were voguing long before Madonna ever decided to do that. And then we forget about those pioneers, right? And we only celebrate Madonna for this new craze that she's brought to pop culture. I think about Mae West, right? Mae West used to go to the balls in Harlem, and she wrote a play about it. That was, like, on Broadway, right? And that, like, we forgot about the houses in Harlem, but we remembered Mae West's play. I think about even movements, right, like abolition. We were just talking about, right, Dorsey,
Yeah.
William Dorsey,
Well,
right?
yeah,
who
William
was
Dorsey.
a drag queen in the 1800s who
America's first drag queen, apparently.
who was, like, fighting, right, against systematic oppression. I think about people like Frances Thompson, who was a black trans woman in the 1800s, who was an abolitionist, right? And who actually the state allowed for white men to come into the home and rape her and her black sister because they were fighting against slavery. So I think that we've always been a part of the mainstream. I think that what happens is gatekeeping, right? And that there are those who become invested in a certain respectability because they think that that brings safety, and then they try to erase the people on whose shoulders they're standing.
And it brings control as well. That kind of, you know, I mean, that kind of suppression is definitely just a mode of control over the people to get across a certain idea that most likely will end up someone being unfashionable. But nonetheless, it is a sense of control, and those pioneers you're talking about, it's not the fact that even that they were gay or trans or any way LGBTQIA, like, it's the fact that they're fighting for some kind of social need and some kind of social change. They also happen to be that as well, you know? So it's just like you were saying, we always have been.
Thanks. Anyone else thoughts on that?
Y'all not talking!
I know, everyone else can talk. We're gonna get very specific with a digital question.
Everyone's so contemplative.
Oh, so I was just going to say. I got very jolted out of the moment. I was going to say that it's interesting when you think about it in terms of visibility, visuality, and to be looked atness. And it's a dangerous differentiation. And too often, you'll step over into one area and commodification of your dissent can turn into to be looked atness instead of visibility.
I mean, how we are as queer people displayed is so important, or like who's doing it, you know, who has control over the image is so important. As a, you know, as with, you know, African American stories or women's stories, it's like who's controlling the narrative. And I think one of the things that we come across a lot of the times is, like you were just saying, the commodifying of, it was probably maybe like last year, I want to say last year's spring New York Fashion Week was an explosion of queer presence and like trans presence, but it was also a commodification of it. Like, it was really just there for people to purchase. A lot of the models that were in these shows were not even paid in money, they were paid in clothes. Clothes don't keep lights on. You know what I mean? So it's that kind of thing that we run across a lot. It's the not acknowledging the roots of a huge, you know, like artistic movement or style of dance or anything that happens. And then we're also left to say, well, what do we do with ourselves? Why are we creating this work? Or if you're a person who's in the community, you find there's a lot of people on your end who don't want to share their work outside of the community at all. And it becomes very insular. And so you have the reverse, where people who are queer are not very friendly to cis straight people because they don't want their presence to then be taken somewhere else.
I think that that's like a history thing, though, right? I think that, you know, we're existing on stolen land, right? We are literally, this land belongs.
Still committing crimes.
So, and part of the tenets of particularly like colonization is that you take the products, you take the gifts, you take the labor, you take the bodies of a people, right? And then you discard the people, the actual living beings. And so, the question for me is about what have you done actually to decenter yourself in a space of privilege and actually center and celebrate other folks, right? I mean, it is not a surprise to me that we're just hearing about William Dorsey, right, or Francis Thompson,
Exactly.
or any of these folks who were really, 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 really change makers and way makers for all of us. Because part of colonization is the suppression of history and the suppression of folks who do not fit into a hierarchy of who they think should be at the forefront.
Exactly, yeah.
Shifting a bit from this discussion, where did you all, I'm curious to hear, and I'm happy to chime in too about my own experience, come to learn about the elements of queer identity that you reflect upon in your work and the way that you innovate now?
I learned about it on the internet, for
Awesome.
sure.
What corners of the internet?
I feel like the internet is a place where a lot of people go to learn about queer identity because they don't see it on TV. And we're in the comments, we're having discourse, we're, you know, deconstructing gender and all of these things all the time. We're making memes about it. And part of what I try to do is talk really vulnerably about my experience in deconstructing my own gender and my own queer journey. And I have people all the time who message me and are like, I totally relate. And I had no idea. I'd never have seen anyone describe it this way before. And I feel like, you know, it's important for us to see ourselves, and most of us have to go to the internet for that, so.
I just spent a lot of time in goth clubs. Seriously, though. I was more always kind of drawn to, like, you know, punk and kind of the weirder stuff because everybody in those kind of subgenres were already, you know, marginalized and felt crazy and strange, and so it was okay to be gay and it was okay to do all these things. I never really actually felt comfortable going to like normal gay clubs, and now it's kind of, that was always my approach, was to go into these spaces where everybody just wants, you know, a certain type of party or a certain type of music, and then to just kind of like be in their face about it, and then eventually people accepted that. They didn't at first.
I think it's really funny I was just wondering while you were talking, Josh, how many of us kind of discovered our queer identity in non-mainstream gay spaces. Because like I know it was not the mainstream gay spaces where I discovered my identity. It was honestly like reading about Marie Antoinette or like, you know, watching a period film or like reading a fashion magazine or something and like collecting these different personalities, but not necessarily like gay personalities. Most of these people were actually like cis straight people. So yeah, I'm sorry to ask a question on top of your questions, but it just makes me wonder, because like thinking about the queer identity, like even my friends who are queer, it wasn't necessarily a mainstream gay space that developed that queer identity. It was the other spaces that allowed them to collect and become that specific kind of person that they are, so.
Yeah, in DC, but you know, it was always a very kind of, you know, this sounds bitchy, but it was always a very kind of stale place, and especially over the last 10 years.
It was totally stale.
I mean,
It's beige.
if you're from here, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it's beige. It's pure one beige.
When I came back to DC permanently 13 years ago, it was just, you know, it was very, very typical. And so it was kind of difficult to find places to go. So we would go places like the Black Cat, or, you know, that's where we always felt much more comfortable, and kind of just forced ourselves on the kind of boring, I guess, nightlife scene that there was. And now it's kind of grown up, and everybody's, you know, very different and very weird. And I think the internet has obviously, you know, helped that quite a bit. Now everybody knows who Divine is. Yay!
Maybe I'm just a nerd and I don't go outside. I don't know.
I think for me, it was in history books, because you know you didn't learn about Two-Spirit people in class, right? You didn't learn about the Reed Marsh people of Sumar in class. You didn't learn about the fact that there were what we would now call LGBTQIA+ people in Nigeria, right, before colonization. And so, you know, my aunt, Liz Bird, she was an advocate, she was an artist, she was the first curator of the Great Blacks and Wax Museum in Baltimore, and so I grew up seeing these monuments of Black people and also being told, here are these books, read these books about the histories of your peoples, so you can really experience yourself reflected in ways that maybe I was not at school. And so along with those stories, and then of course Patti LaBelle, Aretha Franklin, Shaka Khan, my mama who used to sing in church, right? You cultivate for yourself. You begin to see the connections, and all of these stories in very, very many ways help to inspire me in the stories that I tell in my books or in my plays.
Cool. My experience was kind of complicated. It had a lot of different angles that I grew up with things like Will and Grace and Queer as Folk, but really I think the way that I most got connected with at least figuring out my own identity was realizing that people who I already admired for whatever reason, like Leonard Bernstein or Ann Copeland are two examples, had this other thing to their lives that informed who they were and what their creativity was, that was just mentioned in passing in like an inner page of the 500-page book, and it just kind of started making the alarm bells go off. And then when I was in the military, it was in pre-Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and then through the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So that was a whole interesting thing where you're like, and I'm all for pomp and circumstance, and I was for that, but in my own kind of process of determining my identity, I got to a point where I wasn't comfortable suppressing something that was clearly going to be so much of who I was as a creative or as a professional. Which is not to say I'm always walking around with a pride flag, but I needed more freedom to be open in that space. And I was very fortunate in that my colleagues in the military were some of the most amazing humans you'll ever meet. Some of us disagree fervently politically, which is totally fine. We can still talk to each other, which is great. But I kind of had in my head that coming to terms with something and being out about it was going to disrupt my whole life, and it actually just made life more rich and gave me the space to be more fulfilled in everything that I did, because I was lucky enough to have a lot of great support. And growing pains I am Latinx and my mom's side and very Catholic, and so there's a whole thing that happened with that. But it's been a great process of learning. And then I think really in my early 20s, once I started like learning about the different books that I should read, and I went to school in London for a year, it just kind of like my mind started to blow up, and it was really great. And I've spent the last 10 years or so really trying to learn about all of these different aspects of our history that we do not get taught at all, except word of mouth from folks who we look up to. And just to give a shout out to Meg Metcalf and the great work of the Library of Congress, Meg is the first ever women's, gender, and LGBTQ plus studies librarian at the Library of Congress. She's been there for how many years now? Almost five. Wow. Yeah. So Meg is one of a handful of amazing leaders who have been at the Library of Congress since the early 90s, when the library first formed an LGBTQ plus employee association called LC Globe. And for many, many years, the existence of this group of folks at the Library of Congress who were willing to kind of risk their own professional identity with being out at work and questioning policies and bringing hard questions up to upper management in the 90s and onward. Those folks have really done tremendous work in terms of ensuring that LGBTQ communities and history is represented in the acquisitions policies at the library. The library had always been acquiring LGBTQ plus materials, but for many years back in the day, there was a Delta collection where things like Tom of Finland might have ended up. That is not the case anymore, but there has been some really amazing work done there over the years. And really what the Library of Congress does and what the National Archives would do, or the one archives that are in California, is they're doing the work to then make it possible for anyone in a future generation to be able to go to these institutions and find themselves or find a different type of experience that they can learn from. So one of the cool things that Meg's been working on, which will segue to my next question, is acquiring zines for the Library of Congress. And specifically queer zines have been a huge medium of expression that she's been working on. So I'd love to ask the panelists, what are the different forms of expression that kind of have a unique relationship to LGBTQ plus or queer identity, whether it's zines or back in the day in San Francisco when handkerchiefs on a back pocket and the colors was a whole thing, and I'll leave you with that.
Discuss.
I was like, oh, sweetie.
There's still a thing.
Anyone want it?
Well, I'm glad that you talked about zines, because in the previous question I was thinking about that and the importance of small press, not just in terms of reading, but also in telling your own story. And I think that early days of the internet reminded me of, it makes me sound really old, but reminded me of that zine culture in a digital form. And I think that protecting that is very important.
Any other mediums or media in Latin, technically?
Well, you actually have had a zine. I'm calling you out, Josh. I'm sorry. She has actually had a zine, which is a really fabulous one.
It's called Trash Rag.
Trash Rag.
Word.
And it was, I mean, like, you obviously probably can explain this better, but it was definitely a nod to, you know, like the classic zine. It was a hard copy zine. I mean, you might do another one, but it didn't come out like all the time. And it was just a collection of queer identity work. So
Yeah, and it was, you know, it was short stories and poems and photography and slutty selfies and just whatever people like.
Queer
art.
work. Art.
It's the only kind of selfie. But you know, we have such a vibrant community in DC now, especially over the last couple of years. And so I just invited everybody to send me whatever you wanted, and you know, as long as it wasn't hate speech or just straight up porn. And because we were passing it out to just whoever wanted it, and I didn't want it to end up in some 16-year-old's hand, and then their parents are calling me, screaming at me.
That's always fun, right?
I mean, yeah, they do that anyway, whenever their kids come see my band.
But another form that I think about as well, I mean, it's something that we all use, but Instagram. I mean, like, that has opened up so many doors for so many different kinds of people to not feel alone in the world, but especially for queer people. I mean, like, to open up a screen and see someone else, in a whole other country is literally doing or thinking something very similar to you. You don't feel alone. Or to be inspired by the amount of, I'm a performance artist. I work in drag and especially in nightlife, and so the amount of drag queens that have sprung up just with the use of Instagram, good and bad, but it sometimes could seem, yes, sometimes it could seem oversaturated. But the good will rise, the bad will, settle at the bottom. That's how art works.
It's not always true.
Hey, people got jobs. But nonetheless, yes, Instagram is that thing. Instagram is, it's your zine. It's almost your hanky to let people know what you're into, and to let people know how you live and how you see yourself sexually. And also, another thing is when you're talking about hankies, the sexual identity is so important with the queer identity. And I think when talking about queer, as opposed to talking about gay or lesbian, the sexual identity, I think, gets thrown out of the conversation, and that's very important. Your sexual identity is our time. It just popped in my head. But, the thing is that we are not out of the woods of our proximity to whiteness. That is very much so a part of Western society, and Western society is not just Europe and America, it's all over. So we're not out of the woods of thinking of ourselves as, especially as people of color, in our proximity to whiteness. There are a lot of people of color now who are getting us out of that so that we can find a healthy individuality, which I think is the most important thing. Is one, you don't want to necessarily reject a whole other people, but you also don't necessarily want to become like a whole other set of people who are not you and who do not share your stories, who have also manipulated your entire history. Because at some point we have to have peace, so it's not about, I think, it's not about necessarily an anti-whiteness that we need to get to, it's about a healthy coexistence. So that's number one. Number two is we are not out of the woods of propping up masculinity, bottom line. We're basically back in Rome, the masculine body, the masculine figure, the masculine character is more propped up than anything else, beyond anything else. And so we're not out of that place just yet, but we're still, but we're in the beginnings of finding what that looks like and doing it in a healthy way, which is why we have, queer or trans authors, and we have queer performance artists, but we also have the political leaders who are also coming out and being more present and stating their identity, but not necessarily making it the only thing they are, which I think is incredibly important so that people understand we are all well-rounded people and that we need certain things just to live life. But again, yeah, we're not out of the woods of what our relationship with white male cis standards are. We're just now really just seeing it.
And coexistence is obviously very important. I'm sorry, before when I said I didn't want to touch that, I'm gonna touch the Cobb salad now.
I'll touch it after you.
So obviously coexistence is incredibly important, but I think that something that is important to also remember is that the emotional labor that goes into tackling that coexistence is usually one-sided, and it is unpaid teaching, and I think a lot of people would like to know who they can invoice.
Ooh.
Okay, listen.
She just turned that salad over.
Baby, let me tell you something. One thing that I have learned from the girls who have had to work the streets, right, is that you get paid for your labor. So, I don't do any allyship work or solidarity work without getting paid. You know what I mean? I know who to invoice. It's who you ever got to teach. Because we cannot ignore, right, the disproportionate effect of structural oppression, particularly economic oppression on LGBTQ people, particularly trans women of color. I think that for myself, I cannot ignore Sylvia Rivera's famous speech, right, at the Pride Parade in which white cis gay men were trying to silence her, and she was saying she had been raped and gone to jail for gay liberation, and they treat her like this. right? And so we're also not far away from that. And so I think that sometimes when, we see certain things on TV, right? We tend to treat LGBTQ people like a monolith. But I will say this, especially since we're live streaming, white LGBTQ people must be committed to the act of dismantling white supremacy internally and structurally, period. Period. Because they are not free from being racist just because they share one little piece of an intersection. Yeah. Period. And we cannot ignore that historically, black trans women and brown trans women and indigenous trans women have put their bodies, their lives, their freedom on the line for this movement and have been erased and ignored constantly. Constantly. I was about to bring up an example, but it's okay, all right. Before I get on my soapbox.
Bring it out, we're here, do it.
So like all of us, right, have to be committed to dismantling white supremacy. Because what happens is that white cis gay men, you may be able to get some of your rights, right, but we ain't all free unless we all free. And that eventually they'll come for you too.
Everyone is terrified right now. Everyone's calling their white friend, be like, girl, they're coming to get you. Dismantle now. But it's very true. It's very, very true. A very special person in my life brought this up as a point of discussion with very close people of ours. And it's something that, that most people don't really talk about. But, especially if you're a person of color and you have white gay male friends, they are privileged in a system, whether they want to be or not. It's very hard to opt out of a system that still exists if you're still living in it. And benefiting from it. And so, it's very hard to opt out of it. And so, I think the only thing as people of color is that we need to just make sure that we stay healthy. We make sure that we stay mentally healthy, because that's the only thing we can do. I would say, a lot of the times people are just like, it's not our role to educate. It's not. We're in 2020, there's so many resources. If you don't know, that means you're literally closing your eyes, plugging up your ears, and walking through the world blind. There's no excuse. And that's how I usually take it as well. I don't know about anyone else, but when it comes to prejudice, when it comes to turning the visual away from what is actually on the table, henceforth maybe an issue of a POC or POC trans issue, and turning that issue away to something that's more white and cisgendered, I don't take that as an excuse. There is no excuse for that. You know what's going on. You're very well aware. And so I think for all of us, you have to just hold people accountable. When it happens, hold people accountable when it happens. Stand for yourself, stand for other people. Something is shady, say something. It's in those small instances that we start to change the systematic stuff too. As well as vote, sometimes. Yes, just do it.
This is something I've been talking about online a lot lately, because I do think most of my audience on Instagram is white queers, and we definitely do have a racism problem. We think that it excuses us because we're queer. We're like, oh, we're oppressed enough. We're the same, and that is not at all true. So I think it's our job as white people to deal with white supremacy. That's our problem, and it's disgusting, and we need to come together and educate each other and, deconstruct it and deal with it. It shouldn't be on the shoulders of people of color. There's a book called White Fragility that's amazing, that every white person needs to read, and I've been talking about it online. I've been sending PDFs to people, trying to spread it around.
Just randomly sending PDFs to white people.
Yeah, all the white people that follow me, I'm like, here you go.
But I feel like though, right? I feel like though, even thinking about white fragility, right? Is that there's so many black and brown people who have been doing this work before her, the woman who wrote it, who often don't get brought up in spaces, right? So she, one, is benefiting from the analysis, the work of black and brown people. I don't know how much she donates to black and brown organizations, but probably not a lot, and probably not enough. So I also just, I invite us all, right, to be absolutely committed to centering and celebrating the works of Black and brown people even in our lives, particularly, especially in everything. But but when we're talking about doing anti-racist work and dismantling white supremacy, like black and brown, and even climate justice, right? Indigenous people have been talking about climate justice since white people got here and before that, right? And so it is important for us to also center and celebrate POC who have already been doing this work too. So I was about to say something, but never mind.
I think you just said it.
That's my thoughts about that.
So DC's had a lot of change with its queer physical spaces in the last few years, and I think probably, I've only lived here for just under 8 years, but I'm sure going back there's been a lot of change, and I know that the work of the organizations like Rainbow History Project and Latino GLBT History Project are focusing on documenting these changes. In your times in DC, how have you seen the use of the existence of dedicated queer spaces evolve, and how do you feel about where things kind of stand now?
Hello, DC people.
I know, come on.
Who wants to do it? Who wants to take it?
What was the question?
Thoughts on the current status of queer spaces in DC?
I mean, I think right now obviously there's a lot more spaces than there used to be, but I also think that it's kind of like it doesn't really matter anymore, and back in the day it was a lot more fun for us to go into the straight spaces and be loud and queer. I think they were a lot more important back in the day, but right now it's, I don't know, other than like trade, it's all kind of boring.
I mean, I have to disagree with you on that. I think it is still very important, only because listening to so many even young queer people talk about being in a space and actually feeling unsafe, and like not even like a social anxiety unsafe, but like a general like Law and Order unsafe. You know what I mean? Like certain people are like harassing them or being physical with them, or like, and personally, I mean, I'm glad for the role I have in the community because it does protect me from a lot of that kind of stuff. I don't have to engage in a lot of that, but also at the same time, there's too many people who are engaging in it, especially in spaces that, I'm curating or another friend of mine is curating, and like, you hear that at some point in the night when you're talking about loving people and having a great show and putting out a lot of love to people, that another young queer person is being in some way harassed. And on top of that, being harassed by another queer person, which is a whole other beast in itself. But I think the space is still needed. I don't think having necessarily a designated gay club is necessarily needed as much, because we know we can go into a space of any kind and turn it into a queer space. And the people who own the space know that because we give them money. So, I mean, it's a trade-off. It's a trade-off. So, but it's still very much so is important. So, I mean, especially for spaces for trans people to be safe as well. Like that in itself is, we're still trying, I'm not saying still trying to figure it out, people aren't doing it. Because there's no figuring out, people aren't doing it.
Any other thoughts on that?
I don't drink anymore, so I don't go out. So I don't know. But I do have to say that I really like A League of Her Own. It's the only lesbian bar, and they have fully disappeared from the country, so.
There was also a really great bookstore in DuPont Circle.
Lambda Rising?
Yeah.
I used to work there.
Did you really?
I did when I was little, when I was young.
I was low. Were you in LIL, low?
I did, honey. I used to work at Lambda Rising. It was a fun bookstore. It was a great place. It hired, right, all LGBTQ folks. It was great,
I bought porn there, so that was great. Before it was like widely spread on the internet, when you had to like buy a magazine. Yes, I'm much older than I look. It does not crack. Leave me alone. Thank you, thank you. But yeah, no, Lambda, but thinking about places like Lambda Rising, like that was not a bar, it wasn't a club, but it was a place that people came and communed. Like, I didn't need to be at Lambda Rising, but I also knew people that worked there. I probably may have met you there at some
Yeah,
point.
we did.
We did talk about this.
That's
yes,
how
yes.
we became sisters.
But no, yes, oh yes, and yes, everything's coming back now.
That was years ago, girl. Black certainly don't crack, baby.
Wow. Oh my God. But yeah, again, like places like that, it's amazing how a non-nightclub queer space doesn't really exist, especially in our nation's capital. We don't have that anymore. And in a way, it's okay, because you can go anywhere. I mean, anywhere downtown. But in a lot of ways, it's not okay, because we don't need to, there's another thing too, it's just like there's a toxins kind of thing that sits on top of that. The idea of only being able to communicate and be with each other when there's a toxin involved. Alcohol or some kind of drug, whether it be hard or light, who knows? You know, but like, again, having these non-bar, club, you know, spaces, that I think that's something that we do actually need. But we could use one more. That would be great. I would love a cafe. Someone make one. Get a donor to like donate.
Cool. So we're nearing the end of our kind of formal chat session, then we'll go to Q&A very shortly. I'd love to just ask all of you to think of an artist or an organization or an institution or a band or anything else that you think is a really great example of owning queer identity in what you do, and that you would encourage the folks tuning in to us today to check out their work. Whether it's on Instagram, or if it's an author, or another performer.
I mean, this is a hard question, but today I'm going to go with Alison Bechtel, because growing up, and like we already referenced zines, but I think that the Bechtel test grew from that, and the Gina Davis Institute is doing some important work around that, but I think that we could be doing a lot more work around that, and I do also dabble in data science, and I think that it's important to look at who is above the line, who is below the line, who's in front of the camera, who's behind the camera, not just whether two women are talking to each other about something other than a man. It needs to be, like, that was great. So Alison Bechtel, thank you, and also Wallace, thank you. But the next step is, I think, also important.
We're just going down
we
the line.
can go out of order too, whatever you want. It's optional.
Weirdly enough, I'm inspired by a lot of different things: fashion, visual art, fine art, architecture, but there is no single artist or organization that does what I want to happen for the queer identity. I'm not pumping myself up, but I'm the only person that I know that's doing that. And the only reason why I say that is because in all of the discussion, especially when it comes to the gender evolution and pronouns, we went from cis pronouns to the they, them, to genderqueer, skipped right over femme, gay men, the sissies who have been around forever. You know, the sissy uncles, the ones with the bent wrists, like we skipped right over that. And so to be the F word, as I like to call it, is still not okay to a certain degree. It's still something that people don't want to find the power in, and especially the sexuality representation is not there. And so most of my career, and the thing that I always promote, even in all of my work, whether it be on an overt level or undercover, but I always promote the idea of femme gay men being sexualized and in a healthy way, and that it's something that we have the power to do, and it's something that everyone else has the power to receive. And so I do look for that artist that will also partake in that rhetoric, but so far no one has that I've seen yet.
I think that, okay, for myself, there's so many. Jay Mace III, who's co-editing the Black Trans Prayer Book with me. Venus Solanite, she is an amazing author. Oh gosh. Listen, just follow me on Twitter or Instagram, and I will answer the question, and I'll give you a bunch of names, because I mean, there's Tourmaline, right? They are a filmmaker. They're making a film about Mary Jones, who was a Black trans woman in New York in the 1800s. There's so many folks, y'all. Like, so many folks. So I would just say, like, follow me on Instagram, and then I can just, like, send you a list of all my people. And everyone who has contributed to the Black Trans Prayer Book, all are spirit workers, Black trans spirit workers, and also are filmmakers, artists, in and of themselves. So I also would say, like, purchase the book so that you can also learn about them more as well. Yes, 21 people.
I have a similar answer. Follow me on Instagram. I also realized I forgot to say my handle is Clit Vengeance. Thank you. And I actually posted a bunch of my favorite memers on my story today. So if you go there, you can click through and follow them and check out their work. I'm part of a group called the Sapphic Meme Collective. It's like 60 or so queer meme creators on Instagram, and every week we all make memes around a theme on Tuesdays. And I will also say I have another favorite Instagrammer that I'm obsessed with right now, and I don't think that they know that I exist, but I love them. Their name is Lukilla, Lukillahhh, and they make these really beautiful, like, grotesque kind of digital collages that are also memes, and they're also poems, and they're also critiques of the state. Like, they're amazing. So go follow them. Look at my story. Thank you.
I would say just, get more into the punk scene. I mean, there's so much going on there with, like, trans kids and queers and drag and all of that, and like the Heroes Collective. They're representing so much more, and they do things at spaces like Hole in the Sky or Rhizome, where there are plenty of straight edge kids and people that don't drink, and not necessarily an age limit. But, like, that's where there's a lot of young kids, before they kind of figure out where they're going, they kind of find themselves at these shows, and it's such a great community. And whenever we would do shows, like, I'd bring friends, like when our friend Anna, I took her, and she was just like, I have never seen so many queers in one room. Like, holy shit. So that's I guess that's where I'm coming from, is, pay more attention to that kind of stuff, because there's a lot there, and it's a lot of fun, and it's very welcoming.
Cool. I'm going to throw in my own just because I can. I'd love to shout out two New York-based things. One is New York Public Library. They had an amazing exhibit last year for the 50th anniversary of Stonewall that was really wonderfully done and showcased so many of the different voices and stories and groups that were involved in pre-Stonewall, Stonewall, and gay liberation as well. And the other thing going on in New York that I encourage everyone to at least read about online is a new play called The Inheritance, which is on Broadway by Matthew Lopez. It won all the big awards for Best New Play in London, and it is, of all of the, like, gay canon works on Broadway that have been on Broadway in the last few years, this is the one that, at least for me, felt the most relatable to the way we all engage with society now. So I really encourage folks to check out the coverage of that and read some more about it. It's a really wonderful play if you have the time to see it. So we're going to turn it over to questions from the audience now. If you could just raise your hand up high, and we'll get a microphone to you. There's one in the back ready for you. Way up in the back in the second row. Oh, do they have to come down?
No, I'll bring the mic to you. Just raise your hand.
He's raising it.
JR here, he, him, his, DC native. Hey, y'all.
Hey, boo.
Hi.
What's up? Thank you all so much for what you shared, and Jason, especially what you shared about younger queer people not feeling safe in queer spaces. And I wonder if you could just, any of you, talk about, it seems like there's this also intergenerational challenge and opportunity in terms of identity and community, and, like, any experience you might have with that, and learning going both ways, right? So yeah, intergenerational learning in queer community.
I went to high school. I went to Duke Ellington for high school, which is, like, the gayest high school experience a child could ever have, but also was not the happiest because it's still high school. So all those crazy things of high school. So for me, I kind of rejected a lot of queerness. I developed my own version of that, just kind of existing in a very cis world. And then being in nightclubs and meeting younger performers, they have a very different experience now, just with the advent of so much media and so much exposure. So I meet a lot of young queer people who are, like, militantly queer, like out the gate, and so free. And I'm always very astounded by that freedom, because as now a queer person in their 30s from a slightly different generation, like honestly, like I never got to feel that freedom so early. Like that freedom came much later in my life. And so in terms of, for your question, in terms of intergenerational learning, that's something I do pull from the young people, and how to feel that freedom no matter where I go with my queerness.
I also think that there's this feeling, right, of like, you haven't suffered how I suffered, right? You haven't suffered the way I suffered. And I think that, like, that's missing the point of liberation, right? The point of liberation fights is so that the younger generation doesn't have to suffer the way that you suffered. Like, that is the point.
Yeah.
And so I think that, like, I think that sometimes really what feels like vitriol or feels like respectability politics is actually envy and jealousy, because these young people a lot of times are a lot freer. That don't necessarily mean that they're wiser, but they
definitely
have
doesn't mean that.
a perspective, right, of what they think the world should look like, because we are the ones who told them this is what the world should look like. And so liberation means being free from oppressive systems and forces. And name for me one Black person who has ever known liberation, particularly in this country. I'll wait all night for you to give me a name. And so, like, the point is that, like, perhaps, right, oppression sometimes attempts to take away the imagining of new ways of being. So that's why artists are so important, because artists actually give us the tools and the help that we need to imagine new ways of being. And because perhaps, right, certain folks have had to survive within a system of oppression, part of the imagination of what the world could look like, right? Even the desire to imagine it has been beaten out of them, violated out of them. But some of these babies actually are like, no, the world can be that thing. So it is our job as older people not to be like, no, I don't want to do that because X, Y, and Z, but to actually engage them and figure out, how is it in this world that we live in, we can make a world steeped in liberation and love and affirmation where no one has to suffer at all, a possibility. That's my answer to your question about intergenerational learning.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Oprah.
My thought on that is hang out with folks who are of other generations socially and not just in the workplace. You know, you might walk into Annie's on a certain night at a certain time, and there might be a lot of different generations there. Don't just be snarky about it. Like, say hi to someone. It's the thing. And also, like in the workplace, there's a lot that I think in the time that I spent at Library of Congress, and I'm sure Meg can share her perspective at some point in the future on this. So many colleagues have learned the hard way, and they can teach us so much from that experience. But you know, especially when you're in the young whippersnapper mode, which is a thing that was told to me many times at Library of Congress, and I'm sure Meg has heard it too, we don't always come across as receptive to hearing those lessons of the other generations, and at least indicating that we're really going to take it seriously what they're telling us. We a great colleague who I won't name in this moment, who retired from the Library of Congress recently, has been fighting the fight there for 30 years. And it had been a serious fight back in the day, and many, many, many things have progressed at the Library of Congress, and there's great visibility there all the time for the LGBTQ plus community now in the last 4 years. And, you know, this colleague sometimes, you know, would share things that were really frustrating, and like, why are we having to fight the same battle all over again when it was resolved 15 years ago? And that kind of discussion between different generations, I think, really can help us shape how we approach moving things forward, because it is kind of a continuum. There are, and you know, as we've seen politically, you know, there might be 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. And if we're just kind of going it alone with our own kind of group of peers, it does not work, and it will not be sustainable change. to help ourselves out going forward.
But people in the older generation have to be really, really, really honest, right? And have to be really, really, really ready to divest of respectability politics and white supremacy. So, like, of course, it's like, let us all move forward together, as they would say, but, like, we got to be honest about the system and the ways in which the system it adapts, it changes, it shifts, it tries to meet the needs, and that instead of us always saying when like young people are frustrated, right, about the state of oppression, instead of us saying, but look how far we've come, right, say, yes, there's more to do.
Other questions? Yes.
Question. Hi. How do you feel about comedians or satire materials being made by non-LGBTQ folks, but aimed at, well, include that as an element of the joke? And particularly, how do you personally feel about Dave Chappelle and his Stick and Stones comedy special? Thank you.
Well, since we are at the Kennedy Center that I love, this is my thing, right? This is my thing, is that it's not funny. It's not funny, that's number one. It just isn't a funny joke. And there are so many trans comedians who actually tell what we would call trans jokes that are so funny. And so that's number one. It's like, okay, you're saying that comedians should be able to say whatever they want, but like the joke also just isn't funny. It's misinformed, it's violent, right? It's transphobic. And then also, I would like to say this, is that those types of jokes actually do open up the space in the room for people to commit physical acts of violence against us. And so, I was always taught growing up, right, that like, if I'm going to say something, I should at least think about it before I say it. We are at the point now where we know, right? We know that even if it's like, oh, I'm not gonna be offended by it, or my one trans friend or my one black friend ain't gonna be offended by it, that there is someone who will take what you say, right, when you are opening up the space for violence, and then they will justify that. They will use it as justification. No, you cannot control what other people do, but you can control what the F you say out of your mouth. And that's where I'm at with Dave Chappelle.
There's also a thing of artist responsibility. A lot of people think as an artist, like you said before, that you can say or do anything you want to, and that's not the case. If you are putting out work that is being received by the public, you have a responsibility, whether it's written down paper or not. If is that really something that needs to be put out to the public? Is that going to be necessary for the public to hear or move the public? That's number one. For people like Dave Chappelle, a lot of celebrities like that, they are so far removed from reality. I don't think that we should be listening to those people at all, frankly. To be honest, we just don't need to. Like, some people really are just crazy, and we don't have to listen to that. Like,
well,
it's
that's
just
ableist, though. So, right?
No,
Like, I think that the language, right? It's not even that. It's not even about that, right? It's about the fact that there are literal people dying right now. Right now, somewhere in the world, there's a black trans woman who's being murdered. And if you are not invested, right? If you are not invested in using your money, your platform, your time, to actually invest in a community that is facing astronomical levels of violence, state-sanctioned violence, then I don't want to hear what you got to say, period. Because at the end of the day, there were black LGBTQ people fighting for black liberation, so that all of us could be free. So yes, Dave Chappelle is removed from reality, but part of that is because we have also allowed for people like Dave Chappelle, just because he's wealthy, just because he was funny in 1990, right, and has never evolved in his comedy, right?
Exactly, it's true, though.
We allow them to get away with murder. And it's like, if I, as a black intellectual, right, as a black academic, as a black trans woman, has had to learn, evolve, and expand, and my art has had to expand, then so does a black cishet man who don't know shit.
Bottom line.
That's my thought about that. Sorry, I know we're live. Please cover your baby's ears or beep that out. Thank you so much.
One figure who relates to some of what you discussed there is Baird Rustin, who just last week, I think it was, had his charges cleared by the state of California. Baird was one of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s deputies. His papers are at the Library of Congress. They've been there for many, many years. We think so many things are just, we passed that moment in history and we remember just a small amount of what the reality was. And I guarantee you 99% of the people who even know about Baird Rustin didn't know that he had this charge. I'm one of them. I didn't know that he still had this charge against him. And I've been talking about the papers for 8 years, basically. And there's so much digging that we have to do beyond just the headlines and beyond the media. And this is where the libraries and archives come in, and word of mouth and oral history, is that we need to go in and do the work of hearing about what the stories were for ourselves and then making up our own individual minds about how we're going to contribute to creating some change going forward. And as long as we have great people like Meg working at Library of Congress, and Smithsonian has done great work with acquiring these collections, I have hope for the future and for improving the narratives, at least little by little, and hopefully in 25 years or so when we come back to reconvene this panel, we'll have seen...
I'll still look the same.
Right, exactly!
Still look the same.
Yes!
And the Cobb salad will be low-cal, hopefully, but and I'll just have a full head of gray. Yeah. Any other questions? We've still got a few minutes.
Hi, yeah. Devon, he, him, his, or she, her, hers, whichever you prefer. Hi, JR. You spoke about the emotional labor when it comes to cis white masculinity and recentering people of color, or not even recentering, beginning to center people of color and having to teach and pull and guide. And you say, you charge for that emotional labor, which I totally feel you on that. What can we do as a community to try and push each other, push institutions to really actually begin to center these stories, these people, these experiences, and not give up because it's so laborious, because you have to give so much of yourself that isn't received? What do you think we can do to actually make that happen, and how can we also support each other in that?
Okay, I guess it's me again.
I'm thinking too. I'm just thinking about things. I was like, furs for everyone. I have no idea.
Well, yeah, I think that we have to be honest, right, about like what our idea of peace is. For me, right, peace is actually, my idea of peace is liberty, which means that we're all free from oppressive forces. For someone else, their concept of peace might not be that. So I think that we just have to be clear that we're speaking the same language. Because if we're not speaking the same language, that's a different conversation. So, peace, let me see, how can I word this? Peace at the cost of my Black trans life is not a peace that I'm worth fighting for. You understand what I'm saying? And I think that for so long, if you are not white, cis, het, a man, right, wealthy, you're told to sacrifice everything for some kind of greater good. Meanwhile, they're stepping over your corpse and they're moving on, and they're still oppressing the person next to you. And so I'm at this place in my life, and this might not be where anybody else on the panel is at, where my work, my life centers women, it centers Black and Indigenous and brown women, it centers Black trans women, period. And that if white people are invested in learning from me, they must pay me. I am not invested in going out and trying to lead a white person through their own internalized white supremacy for free. Because at the end of the day, I still got lights, I still got bills to pay, I still got mouths to feed, right? And so to answer your question, I don't know. What I do know is that I center and I celebrate the people who I know perhaps institutions and systems are not. And sometimes that is enough. And that the fact that I'm here, a Black trans woman at the Kennedy Center Reach, on this panel with these amazing artists, right, looking as fly as I am, as beautiful as I am, is itself a revolutionary act, because colonization tried to kill everyone who was like me.
You brought up a really good point briefly about economics and social economic class, and that is a huge issue that a lot of people can actually relate to, no matter what race you are in this country. We treat people who are not wealthy in this country like shit, bottom line. And I'm just saying kind of rich, wealthy. Even kind of rich is being treated like shit at this point. And so, if anything, identifying the problems and then being honest about those problems, being actually honest about what is suppressing you, not the lies or the conspiracy theories, but what honestly is suppressing you. There is no solid solution because, as I said before in the beginning, we are in the midst of figuring out what that looks like and what that sounds like, that kind of change, that kind of systematic change. I would also say, and it's really funny, I had a conversation with one of my friends a long time, like 2 years ago, our dear friend Hannah, young, gorgeous, pale white woman, beautiful, cis, hetero, and she was just like, as a white ally, what could I do to help? And I was like, the only thing I can do, the only thing I can think of is to just listen.
Sometimes they can give us money too.
You can definitely
How
give us
about
money.
that?
Hannah doesn't
How
have,
about- 'cause that's
Hannah,
very real.
Hannah ain't got no money,
Intangible.
so I want to.
Okay, I got you.
Sorry if you're listening to this live, Hannah. She's just working for it. She's working for it. But I mean, honestly, but that's another thing, though. That's an economic thing, though. That goes back to an economic thing. There are probably many white people that you talk to on a regular basis that cannot just give us money because, yes, systematically, there's a privilege to their skin tone, but it's not fully realized in their own bank accounts because systematically, it's still about who the fuck is rich and who is not, and who is going to stay rich and who will not get to there. And the people who want to stay rich don't want certain people to get to that point. And so it is, I think, when it comes down to everyone on just a micro level, on an everyday basis, the only thing I can think of is listen. Listen, if someone's telling you their story, listen to their story and receive their story. I think that's one of the first steps that we can take.
Thank you both for responding. And I kind of have a follow-up question to the non-POC folks on the panel. How can you hold your counterparts, your other white people, other non-POC folks and institutions and communities accountable for centering queer, trans, POC stories, people, bodies, experiences?
How can we hold them accountable for centering or not centering?
Well, holding them accountable for not centering, which then, hopefully the next step is to be able to center.
Oh, I mean, we definitely just need to talk about it really loudly with all of our white friends and family. I think that memes are really great ways to spread ideas and propaganda and, good propaganda and bad propaganda. And I think myself and a lot of the white queers that I make art with online are really aware of this all the time, and we try to make memes that we can share around with our white followers that are critical of this and encourage everyone to center people of color. We just gotta talk about it all the time, really loudly, and give our money.
You were listening.
On the thought of the money, definitely booking artists of color for events, DJs, performance, anytime, if you have the capacity, if you have the opportunity, if somebody is giving you a certain amount of money to bring in performers, make sure you're hiring performers of color and spreading that money around. You know, you have that opportunity, share it.
Also, I think on the money tip, though, too, is that I know some people who sometimes will give $10, right, to an organization that's supposed to be LGBTQ plus, but it's run by a white cis man, and it actually doesn't help the communities that it says that it's going to help. So, like, if you are giving you know, I won't name any names because this is, you know, Library of Congress and the Reach, right? They're like, don't you be doing no political work. If you are now currently, right, even if you are not rich, but you're donating to a certain organization, and that organization isn't actually on the ground doing work, take that $10 little, that $5 little, or that $1 little, and then donate it to an actual like organization that's led by trans POC folks, right? Like I think about Black Trans Travel Fund, right? I think about Appalachian. That's an app that you can actually sign up to now that helps people with bail, right? Meeting their bail money. Those are two, right? Two organizations started by Black trans people, by two Black trans men, and so yeah. That's just like the beginnings of the.
I totally agree and prefer to just put my money directly in Venmos, in people's Venmos, like
I
not
like
even
that
an
too.
organization, just like, here you go, you know.
My Venmo is P Noir. I didn't want y'all to think I didn't want to take money. I'm just trying to tell you there's people out there with no money, but I will take money. So.
And buy the books, right? Buy the books and the art and the of POC, particularly LGBTQ POC artists as well. There's so many books and artists out now that are doing amazing work. Like, do that joint, buy it instead of buying like, child.
And buying direct from the artist is always better than buying from massive conglomerates who shall not be named. If you're in the book world, IndieBound is a great place to shop that does the same thing as those other platforms, but hooks you up with actually a direct indie bookstore that's in your community, and you can go through and pick whether it's here in DC Politics and Prose or East City or Mahogany. So do some research, and if you're buying art on Instagram, for example, just message the artists. They want to hear from you. It's actually a really exciting thing. You can get commissioned artwork on there. It's really amazing. And I'm sure you can get some awesome customized memes after today. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time for this panel, but this has been a really wonderfully productive discussion, I think. It was really enriching for me personally, and hopefully for others to hear about the different experiences that we've all had in your fields. And I encourage everyone to check out the Kennedy Center's upcoming Programming with Library of Congress. Next Monday is the last of the 4 that are this month, featuring Jacob Tabia and also Casey McQuiston. And visit the library's LGBTQ plus portal, loc.gov/LGBT, to learn more about all of the great resources that exist at your nation's library. It's the largest library in the world. If you want to get into super nerdy electronic databases, Meg will personally instruct you on how to use all of them. They're like videos from queer things in the 60s that you wouldn't even imagine exist. So if you're a creative and you're looking for raw material to bring into your own work, connect with Meg, and hope you enjoy the library's collections as much as I do. So thank you all. Thank you to the Reach. Thank you to the Library of Congress. And we look forward to seeing you again in 25 years when we revisit this panel topic. And some of us will have aged, some of us will have not.
Not me.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming tonight to Millennium Stage. For more information, you can check out our website at kennedy-center.org. Once again, please come next week. We'll be in the Family Theater. It's an author discussion, and they will be selling the books afterwards and doing a book signing. And please, just one last time, give it up for our panelists.